The twin moons hung low over the desert, one a pale silver sliver, the other a burning amber, casting long, wavering shadows across the jagged dunes. Elias had pitched his small tent in a pocket of sand that was slightly flatter than the surrounding chaos, and he muttered to himself as he hammered in the last peg, cursing the stubbornness of both the ground and his own coordination. The tent, battered and patched from countless expeditions, flapped angrily in the wind like a petulant animal, and Elias swatted at it with the corner of his sleeve as if he could reason with canvas. "You'd think after 3 trips to the outer belts, I'd have this down," he said aloud, immediately regretting the hubris of thinking the desert would ever be simple. The sand underfoot shifted with every movement, and the wind carried with it a fine mist of metallic dust that glittered faintly in the moonlight, sticking to his unwashed hair and the small beads of sweat that formed despite the cold of the night. He paused, wiped his brow with a sleeve, and leaned against the tent pole with a grunt that suggested both fatigue and philosophical resignation. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum vibrated across the dunes, like the desert itself was settling into a slow, contemplative sigh. Elias squinted. His scanners detected nothing abnormal, but the hum persisted, a subtle undertone that seemed almost musical. He tilted his head, trying to place the pitch. Probably just the wind, or maybe sandworms. Not that I've ever seen one. He stepped back to admire his handiwork, forgetting for a moment that he was alone, or at least thought he was. From the corner of his vision, a flicker of movement drew his attention. At first it appeared to be a trick of the wind, the way the dunes curved and caught the moonlight, but then the movement repeated with too much purpose to be random. Elias froze, one boot halfway into the sand, scanning the horizon. He squinted, frowning, and adjusted the small visor on his helmet. There, slipping across the crest of a dune, was a shape too deliberate to be a stray rock or shifting sand. Small, humanoid, and impossibly fast. "Great," he muttered. "I've been found by whatever that is. Fantastic." The figure stopped, crouched, and observed him for a heartbeat. Or maybe it was several heartbeats stretched thin over the desert's unusual time distortion. Then it darted toward the tent, faster than his legs could carry him, and disappeared behind the flaps with a barely audible rustle. Elias cursed and stumbled forward, grabbing the flap. His heart raced, not entirely out of fear, but from the sudden surge of adrenaline and the absurdity of the situation. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ozone and sand, and in the corner, a pair of wide, luminous eyes blinked at him. They belonged to a girl, human in almost every respect, yet her long, tapered ears gave her an otherworldly elegance that made the subtle curve of her skull seem deliberately sculpted. Her ears caught the ambient light, creating a halo effect that would have seemed almost divine if the circumstances weren't so chaotic. She pressed herself against the tent's interior wall, breathing fast but controlled, and her gaze flitted nervously between Elias and the flap he held open. "Hi," Elias said, waving his hands as if she might vanish if he didn't communicate through the universal language of panic. "You're not, local fauna, right? Definitely not some predatory insect, I hope." He swallowed, realizing his words sounded ridiculous even to himself, but the girl's faint twitch of amusement, her ears flicking slightly as if to acknowledge the absurdity, encouraged him. The tension in the tiny space was palpable, but there was also a strange levity, a shared recognition that survival had a funny way of insisting on humor when it mattered most. The girl straightened slightly, her gaze steadying, and for a moment Elias wondered if she might just speak in an unknown language that would reduce him to gibbering nonsense. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly in what could have been confusion or curiosity or a very subtle rebuke for his stumbling introduction. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quickly, because apparently announcing the obvious was necessary in these situations. He offered a hand awkwardly, then retracted it when he remembered the multitude of ways humans could be deadly even unintentionally. "Really, I promise. Scout's honor, though I'm technically not a scout, more like a wandering, slightly confused tourist. Her ears twitched again, a subtle ripple that suggested amusement. She didn't move toward him, but her eyes softened slightly, and Elias took it as a small victory. He crouched down on one knee, trying to seem smaller, less threatening, less like the apex predator the desert might assume him to be. "Okay," he said, "let's make a deal. I'll try not to scream if you try not to, vaporize me with psychic powers or anything like that. Fair." The girl's mouth curved into something almost resembling a smile, and for the first time, Elias allowed himself to breathe a little more easily. The hum outside the tent had grown slightly louder, carrying the faint resonance of energy fields interacting with the metallic dust, a reminder that the desert was far from empty or inert. He glanced toward the flap. "So you just ran here from, what exactly? Raiders, giant sand krakens, your mother's less than pleasant cousin." She tilted her head again, expression carefully neutral, though her ears twitched at the mention of raiders. It was clear that humor was a mechanism she might not fully trust yet, but Elias, in a burst of desperate optimism, pressed on. "Because, if it's raiders, I'm not much of a fighter. But if it's giant sand krakens, I'm excellent at running away, really top tier." Her lips quirked, almost a laugh, and Elias took that as a green light. He relaxed just a fraction, the tight knot of anxiety loosening with the absurdity of the scenario. He had survived asteroid storms, gravity collapses, and malfunctioning hovercraft, and now he was negotiating peace with a frightened alien girl in a tent the size of a large closet. Somehow, that felt fitting. Minutes passed in a delicate dance of silence and careful observation. He learned to read the slight twitches in her ears, the almost imperceptible shifts in her stance that signaled comfort or caution. She learned, cautiously, that he wasn't going to suddenly transform into some cosmic predator, though she remained alert, ears swiveling to detect every faint noise from the desert beyond. Finally, Elias slumped back against the tent wall, letting out a long sigh, part relief, part exhaustion. "Well," he said, "I guess we're tent mates for the night, which, for the record, is a very unusual first encounter. I mean, I usually meet people in bars or on conference calls, not in tents, potentially life-threatening desert situations. But hey, variety is the spice of life, right?" Her eyes crinkled slightly at the edges, and her ears flicked in a motion that was unmistakably playful. It wasn't full laughter, but it was a start, a bridge between fear and trust, a silent acknowledgement that in this vast, indifferent desert, two beings from different worlds had found a small, improbable pocket of connection. Elias smiled, muttering under his breath, "Not bad for a Monday night." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the metallic scent of the dunes, the hum of energy fields, and the soft rustle of sand across ancient alien ruins buried just beneath the surface. Inside, two unlikely allies shared a moment of fragile, humorous calm, unaware that this night, this tent, and this small, long-eared girl would mark the beginning of an adventure that neither of them could have anticipated, and that would change the course of their lives in ways both dangerous and delightfully unexpected. As the hours stretched and the twin moons traced their slow arcs across the sky, Elias and the alien girl settled into the quiet rhythm of survival, laughter, and cautious companionship. And the desert hummed along with them, a vast, enigmatic audience to the improbable friendship taking root within a battered, flapping canvas tent. The tent had barely begun to settle into the rhythm of the desert night when the soft click of a mechanical whirring began from somewhere near the floor. Elias froze, mid-chew on the last of his ration bars, eyes darting to the sound as though it might leap from the canvas and announce itself as a life-threatening entity. The sound grew louder, a polite yet insistent hum, accompanied by faint blinking lights from a panel that had not existed a moment before. He leaned forward, peering under the folds of the tent, and nearly toppled backward when a small, spherical drone hovered into view, its surface polished chrome that reflected the dim glow of the lantern. The drone blinked in 7 distinct colors, each one more impatient than the last, and emitted a polite voice in a sequence of tones that no human language had yet codified. Elias flailed one hand, waving it off. I'm friendly. Totally friendly. Not trying to break any protocols or hack your circuits or whatever it is you do. He stepped closer, only to have the drone retreat a few inches, hovering midair with the precision of something that had been programmed for diplomacy and stubbornness. The alien girl watched from the corner, ears twitching in perfect rhythm with the drone's color-coded pulses. Elias noticed the subtle way she leaned forward, her long ears tracing the frequency vibrations in the air, picking up nuances he couldn't hope to perceive. "Oh, you can hear it?" he asked, bewildered. She gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that this was normal for her species but extraordinary for him. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "I am officially outclassed by a teenage alien girl in a fancy flying sphere." The drone emitted a soft trill, then a descending sequence of tones that seemed almost musical. It rolled slightly in midair, gesturing toward Elias with a polished appendage. He squinted at the patterns, noticing for the first time the small etchings along the metallic surface, symbols that pulsed faintly in sync with the colored lights. Okay, I think it wants, what exactly? Friendship, a handshake. A very awkward dance. The alien girl tilted her head, her lips twitching in amusement, ears swaying with the frequency, and Elias realized she might be suppressing a laugh. In a desperate bid to understand, Elias reached out slowly. The drone made a tiny chirp, recoiling just slightly, as if it were testing his intentions. He froze, hand hovering midair, trying not to resemble the panicked human stereotype. "I promise I'm friendly. I mean mostly. Only occasionally prone to accidental explosions or the misfiring of experimental graviton devices." The alien girl's shoulders shook with quiet laughter, her ears flicking in rhythm with the drone's blinking. "Apparently, sarcasm is understood universally," Elias muttered, half to himself. After several tense moments, she stepped forward, the tent creaking slightly under the movement. Her hands were delicate but precise, moving with confidence as she reached for the drone, which twitched at her approach. With a soft hum and a gentle flick of her fingers, she sent a wave of subtle vibrations through the air. The drone paused mid-chirp, hovered motionless, and then flattened one of its appendages in a gesture that Elias could only interpret as surrender. "Well," he said, "that's teamwork, I guess. You communicate through sound patterns. It communicates with blinking colors, and I'm here to provide moral support and bad jokes." They spent the next hour navigating the tent-turned laboratory, the drone now following them like an overzealous tour guide. Elias discovered that the creature was more than a simple automaton. Its sensors could detect minute changes in temperature, pressure, and even emotional resonance, which explained the way it had flinched at his nervous energy. The alien girl demonstrated her own abilities in turn, her ears picking up electromagnetic fluctuations in the tense environment, causing her to tap a precise sequence against the canvas floor. The drone responded immediately, its lights pulsing in complex patterns, and Elias found himself laughing at the absurd choreography of it all. "I never thought I'd be conducting an alien symphony with a floating robot and a pointy-eared girl," he said, staggering backward to avoid tripping over a loose tent rope. Outside, the desert wind had shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of ionized sand and the distant echoes of fractured energy grids. Elias peeked through the flap, noting a horizon that seemed to bend under the influence of some subtle gravitational anomaly. "I swear," he muttered, "every desert has its own sense of humor. First it makes you trip over rocks, now it warps reality for giggles." The alien girl glanced at him, a small smirk playing across her features, and flicked her ears in acknowledgement. She spoke then in the soft, deliberate cadence of her species, words he could barely comprehend. The drone chirped, and Elias realized with a start that the two were communicating in tandem, a duet of frequencies and lights. For the remainder of the night, they experimented with the drone's capabilities. It could map gravitational distortion. Version of a bad prank? He asked, voice half-shouted over the rising wind. She shook her head, ears flicking sharply, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. Not a prank, she said simply. Storm is real, very angry and very loud. They pressed on, navigating by the faint glimmer of bioluminescent rocks that she identified with a tilt of her head, ears vibrating slightly to gauge the resonance of their energy fields. Elias stumbled, sending a small plume of sand into the air, and muttered a string of expletives under his breath, which she translated with a raised eyebrow and a barely contained laugh. "You humans have such complicated curses," she said, voice teasing, for something that could be replaced with a polite humming tone. The wind intensified, whipping their clothing and hair into chaotic tangles. Elias pulled a tattered scarf over his mouth, trying to filter the stinging particles, and glanced at her. "Do you have, like, a natural sandstorm shield, or are you just naturally dramatic?" She tilted her head again, and he realized the movement was less about drama and more about listening. Subtle shifts in the storm's vibration, frequencies too precise for human perception, the kind of reading that made her a walking, breathing meteorological instrument. He tried to follow, stepping carefully, but every movement felt exaggerated, clumsy, his human frame unfit for the grace she exhibited. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, time stretching and folding in the storm's chaotic pulse, and they found shelter in a jagged outcrop of rock that jutted from the desert like a broken tooth. The space between the stones was narrow, but sufficient for their small forms. Elias huddled against a wall, brushing grit from his eyes and trying to look composed, though his hair and scarf were plastered to his face in a chaotic parody of desert chic. She crouched nearby, her long ears flicking constantly, sensing vibrations through the rocks as if she were part of the desert itself. "I've never seen anyone survive." "Version of a bad prank?" he asked, voice half-shouted over the rising wind. She shook her head, ears flicking sharply, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. "Not a prank," she said simply. "Storm is real, very angry and very loud." They pressed on, navigating by the faint glimmer of bioluminescent rocks that she identified with a tilt of her head, ears vibrating slightly to gauge the resonance of their energy fields. Elias stumbled, sending a small plume of sand into the air, and muttered a string of expletives under his breath, which she translated with a raised eyebrow and a barely contained laugh. "You humans have such complicated curses," she said, voice teasing, for something that could be replaced with a polite humming tone. The wind intensified, whipping their clothing and hair into chaotic tangles. Elias pulled a tattered scarf over his mouth, trying to filter the stinging particles, and glanced at her. "Do you have, like, a natural sandstorm shield, or are you just naturally dramatic?" She tilted her head again, and he realized the movement was less about drama and more about listening. Subtle shifts in the storm's vibration, frequencies too precise for human perception, the kind of reading that made her a walking, breathing meteorological instrument. He tried to follow, stepping carefully, but every movement felt exaggerated, clumsy, his human frame unfit for the grace she exhibited. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, time stretching and folding in the storm's chaotic pulse, and they found shelter in a jagged outcrop of rock that jutted from the desert like a broken tooth. The space between the stones was narrow, but sufficient for their small forms. Elias huddled against a wall, brushing grit from his eyes and trying to look composed, though his hair and scarf were plastered to his face in a chaotic parody of desert chic. She crouched nearby, her long ears flicking constantly, sensing vibrations through the rocks as if she were part of the desert itself. "I've never seen anyone survive a sandstorm without a proper exosuit," he muttered. "And here I am, still upright, mostly intact. That counts for something, right?" Her lips quirked and she made a sound that was almost a chuckle, ears swaying slightly. "Mostly intact is subjective," she said, voice teasing. And by your expression, you are not intact emotionally. Elias groaned, sinking lower against the stone. Touché, he admitted. I am emotionally sandblasted. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wind, electric static, and shifting sand that played across the horizon like an alien orchestra. Inside their stone shelter, they found a strange, luminescent fungus clinging to the crevices, pulsing faintly in response to their presence. She extended a hand, fingertips brushing the soft glow, and it responded with a gentle hum, a low vibration that Elias felt in his chest. Okay, he said slowly. So apparently the desert also grows mood-sensitive fungi. Fantastic. And here I thought it was just sand, rocks, and screaming wind. The alien girl chuckled again, and he realized the sound was contagious. He found himself laughing, despite grit in his teeth and exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Do they always react to humans? He asked, examining the softly glowing organisms. She shook her head. No, they react to emotional resonance. Fear, humor, excitement, subtle changes in perception. They can sense intent. Elias raised an eyebrow. You mean they can tell if I'm terrified or just a little ridiculous? She tilted her head. Both. And currently you are mostly ridiculous, but improving. As the storm continued its furious dance outside, Elias and the alien girl began experimenting with the fungi. She demonstrated that by touching the luminescent growths in precise sequences, she could produce a series of gentle pulses that created a miniature holographic projection, a map of the surrounding desert, rendered entirely in glowing bioluminescence. Elias stared in awe, almost knocking over a small rock in his excitement. So this little fungus combined with your, whatever it is you do with your ears can map the desert. That's insane. She nodded, tapping a pattern that caused the projection to shift and expand. Not insane, she corrected, a teasing edge to her tone. Practical, efficient, and surprisingly decorative. Elias laughed, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders despite the roaring storm. Efficient and decorative, huh? That sounds like the description of my last spaceship. Minus the decorative part, though we did try. They spent the next several hours exploring the possibilities. The projection revealed hidden caverns, energy currents running through the sand, and faint traces of old settlements long buried. Elias found himself making increasingly absurd suggestions, like setting up a makeshift cafe in the middle of a sandstorm, or teaching the desert creatures to form a conga line to signal safe passage. The alien girl's ears twitched in amusement, and she responded with dry, sarcastic commentary that made him laugh harder than he thought possible under such extreme conditions. At one point, a minor tremor shook the ground beneath them, and Elias yelped, stumbling into her shoulder. Sorry, that wasn't me, that was probably the planet moving, right? She shook her head, flicking her ears in a way that suggested exasperation. Mostly, yes, but your balance could use work. He grinned sheepishly. And your sarcasm could use more. Elias chuckled, brushing sand from his sleeve. Optimism or delusion, it's a fine line. She flicked her ears in amusement. Mostly optimism, she replied. And for a moment, deep in the heart of an ancient cavern beneath an alien desert, laughter echoed alongside the hum of long-dead machinery, a small, improbable signal that even in the universe's vast indifference, companionship, and humor could still endure. The desert was quiet now, almost unnervingly so. The twin moons had retreated beyond the horizon, leaving only the faint shimmer of starlight and the residual glow of bioluminescent fungi scattered across the dunes. Elias adjusted the strap of his pack, brushing off the lingering dust, and glanced at the alien girl crouched beside him. Her long ears swiveled in precise, subtle movements, catching vibrations in the sand and air that he could no longer perceive, not fully, but enough to understand that she had become the map of the desert in motion. She was scanning the horizon, her eyes sharp and deliberate, yet when they met his, there was a flicker of that familiar, faint amusement that had accompanied him since the first chaotic night in the tent. "You're ready, then?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant. Ready for the next stretch of dunes, ready to face the raiders they had managed to avoid through a combination of luck, ingenuity, and her uncanny perception. Or ready to return to a life that, for him at least, would never be quite the same. Her ears flicked, ears that had learned to interpret subtle energy currents, now subtly glowing in response to the distant remnants of the sandstorm's electrostatic charge. "Ready," she replied softly, almost formally, though there was the smallest edge of levity in her tone. "It is time to move." They emerged from the cavern network, stepping carefully across the faintly glowing sand veins that she had taught him to sense, their path illuminated by the soft pulses of the luminescent fungi. Elias marveled at how ordinary the desert seemed now, as if familiarity had stripped it of its terror. Only the faint shimmer of energy lines and the occasional hum of buried ancient machinery reminded him that this world had once been a crucible of civilizations far older than his own understanding. "You know," he said, scratching at his scarf, "I never thought I'd get used to the idea of sand that's alive, or alive enough to gossip about me behind my back." The alien girl's lips quirked. Her ears twitched, and he could swear she had snorted, the sound so delicate it could almost be mistaken for the wind. Their first objective was the network of waypoints she had identified with the drone and the fungi, an improvised map that led them to a hidden plateau where the last remnants of the raiders' surveillance arrays had been abandoned, burned out in the storms they had endured. Elias knelt to inspect a broken antenna, making a sarcastic comment about the raiders' choice of Dacre. "Really, you guys invest in the worst security systems ever. I mean, this is almost cute if it weren't meant to kill me." The alien girl flicked her ears in mild amusement, nudging the device with her hand and producing a small pulse that illuminated dormant energy cells. The energy flowed into the drone, which buzzed to life in a series of cheerful chirps, its lights blinking in an almost celebratory rhythm. Elias grinned, raising his hands as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "Yes, see. All it needed was a little TLC and a teeny bit of my brilliant improvisation, and of course her superior alien guidance." He gestured at the girl, who shook her head, ears flicking with amused impatience. With the array activated, they traced a final signal that would serve as a beacon, warning future travelers of the remaining hazards. Elias marveled at how she manipulated the environment with such precision, her long ears catching subtleties he would have dismissed as irrelevant. He realized with an almost dizzying clarity that her perception had not just guided them safely, it had changed how he saw the world. He could now feel the currents in the sand as more than a nuisance, interpret patterns in the wind as clues, and read the hum of energy like an open book. And perhaps most importantly, he had learned to laugh in the face of danger, not as a shield, but as a bridge. They continued to the edge of the plateau, where a shimmering wormhole had opened in the wake of the storm's electrostatic discharge, a temporary rift created by natural resonances interacting with the ancient machinery. Elias knelt, examining it carefully, scanning for instability and joking through gritted teeth. "Well, if we die, at least we die in style. Quantum death by desert wormhole has a nice ring to it." She tilted her head, ears twitching in amusement, and offered him a hand. "Careful," she said softly. "We can survive this, but style is optional." He took her hand, and together they stepped into the wormhole. Light twisted around them in fractal ribbons, bending perception and scattering their shadows across dimensions. Elias felt vertigo claw at his stomach, but the presence of the alien girl beside him, steady, aware, attuned to the shifting currents, was an anchor. Her grip, gentle but firm, reminded him that survival was more than instinct. It was trust, shared intelligence, and the quiet courage of someone who had endured more than he could imagine. They emerged on the other side in a valley that glowed with faint phosphorescence, the remnants of a civilization that had long since vanished. Ancient constructs rose from the ground like the bones of a forgotten world, and Elias marveled at the sheer scale. "I take it this is important?" he asked, voice echoing softly in the alien air. She nodded, ears flicking. "Important, safe, and temporary. We can rest here before the next phase." The alien girl guided him through the ruins, pointing out energy conduits that hummed softly, crystalline panels that stored centuries of solar energy, and conduits that could be used to establish a network of safe paths for others. Elias followed, clumsy yet enthusiastic, and together they activated several nodes, laughing at the minor sparks and humming noises each activation produced. "It's like turning on Christmas lights in a haunted museum," he said, ducking as one node emitted a harmless electrical arc. She flicked her ears, lips twitching. "Your analogy is acceptable." Hours passed in this slow rhythm of work and mild chaos, punctuated by moments of humor. Elias dropping tools, making ridiculous suggestions, or commenting on the apparent vanity of the ancient civilization that had left intricate murals of serious-looking figures balancing improbably delicate devices. She responded with quiet amusement, correcting his interpretations with precision, yet never failing to allow room for his jokes. By the time the valley was fully illuminated and the network functional, they had created a map, a set of safe zones, and a subtle communication system that would guide others through the desert safely. Elias looked at her, noticing the faint weariness in her posture, the subtle tension behind her calm exterior. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd meet someone who can literally sense the universe like it's a song. You make it easier. Not just the desert, the whole mess." Her ears twitched, a small smile on her lips. "And you make it more tolerable for humans. Their chaos is endearing in small doses." They found a place to rest, a natural alcove formed by crystal-laced rock. Elias sat down, brushing dust from his sleeves, and the alien girl settled beside him. For the first time since their journey began, the desert felt less like a threat and more like a world that had been negotiated, tamed, and understood, at least partially. He realized with a faint astonishment that he had changed. He no longer approached danger with blind panic. He analyzed, he adapted, and he laughed, not merely as a defense, but as a statement of survival and resilience. The alien girl extended her hand, which Elias took after a moment.